Hey everybody, happy Saturday. I'm going to be talking with Julia Seal again today. We've got this 4-day series on toxic behaviors that create and escalate conflict in relationships. And this topic is really interesting because we certainly all have lots to learn from it. There's Julia, bring her on. Let's see, how do I get you in here, friend? Sometimes this takes me a minute. There we go. Yesterday we talked about criticism and blame, and today we're going to be chatting about the flip side of those two things, which is defensiveness. There she is. Hi, Julia.
Hi.
Happy Saturday.
Yeah, and you too. And we both
Yeah,
look like we've been exercising.
I have been. Have you?
I've been in the garden, so I quickly did like a wash and
That's
yeah.
lovely. That's awesome. I got a quick spin in on my wheels, but I'm gonna go
Nice.
out again after our live, so I didn't bother changing because I'm going right back out there to do it again.
Right, can you see me? Because I'm in a slightly different place today.
Yeah, yeah, all good, all
Oh,
good.
good.
But today we're
Yay.
talking
Well, we're
about
talking about
defensiveness. Yeah,
more fun stuff. I hope people enjoyed the criticism piece yesterday.
yeah. I had a couple people reach out personally and send me some messages about how useful it was for them and how this term of unskilled, what was it, an unskillful request, plus this kind of judgment on character is what makes the criticism so ineffective. And I just wanted to let you know people thought that was a really helpful way to dissect what criticism is. So they get their head around, okay, how can I do this in a different way?
Yeah, because, sometimes we do have to dissect it afterwards. It's quite amazing to be able to do it in the moment. So we've got to practice some of the
Yeah.
stuff afterwards, even if we've had an explosion with someone, is to go back and dissect it and to pick out and see what you're looking for. And then, then the more you are familiar with the tools, the more you're familiar with your own response, then you can start acting in the moment, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, self-awareness. And then you were also talking yesterday a lot about the difference between react and respond. I thought that might be interesting to just go over that. If you haven't watched the video from yesterday, it's on criticism, it's on our IGTV or wherever you're watching this. You can find another link to the other video. Today's defensiveness, but this topic of react and respond, could you give us a little recap on that? Because I think it's so important to make sure everybody has this concept kind of clear.
Yeah, so I think that's really where we want to get to. The whole idea about how to neutralize conflict, how to reduce it, impact on us and on others is for a different kind of response to our normal automatic response, because the automatic response is the reaction, the one that we're wired for. Now that wiring is carried, through from childhood, what we experienced in our family groups. And it's, like I said yesterday, hot-wired into our system, as well as even hot-wired into our primitive brain in terms of, the fight or flight reaction. So, the whole art of this, and I think this is the wonderful thing about life and whole being, is it is an art and a science to how do we shift ourselves from that really reactive space into the responsive space. And I think, we spoke a lot yesterday about some of the
You almost said last week.
last week, and like yesterday. So if people are watching this and they haven't seen the first video, even if you just jump in and watch the beginning, then there's a lot more on,
Yeah.
the react and the respond piece. But, one of the tools I offered yesterday was something like breath to help you just create that pause between your automatic response. And one of the things I said is I take my pulse, right? Just as a way of calming myself down. I just go, I'm literally sitting there at the table and I can feel my pulse racing. Something else I want to offer people today is if you are feeling yourself triggered and that rush of heat or that breathlessness is something you can do to calm the vagus nerve, which we spoke about, it's literally, and no one will see what you're doing, right? Is to just stroke your ear around the edges of your ears like this, right?
It
And
is
here,
calming.
And if necessary, this is also wakes up the vagus nerve, and the vagus nerve is your rest and rejuvenate of the parasympathetic nervous system. So anything you can do, and people won't really notice if you're doing that. If you're feeling triggered by what's going on, just give yourself a little bit of help. And the minute you start doing that, right, so you're doing a physical thing, which is actually having an impact. But what you're also doing is you become aware of what's going on, and that awareness is the most special thing, because that's your insert into between react and respond. So the minute you suddenly remember, Julia said I should stroke my ears, you're there, right?
I mean, it sounds weird. It sounds weird as hell, but like it's in a way, you're conditioning yourself, right? You're giving yourself this like, okay, when I do this, I mean, I know it has its own biological kind of impact, but also you're just buying that time to be able to respond and not react. Okay.
Yeah, because you're using both wisdom, right? You're using your cognitive wisdom, which is to remember this conversation, and then the somatic wisdom, which is, like you say, the biological response is going to work already. So any little tool that you have, and lots of people say that, breathe and count to 3. Well, they don't say that for no good reason.
Yeah,
so, that's kind of react and respond in a nutshell, really.
Yeah, good. No, I thought that was important to start out reminding ourselves about that today. So yesterday you wound up our conversation saying, all right, we talked about criticism. We went into depth a bit about how it shows up, why it shows up, the root of it, these issues of power, powerlessness, and control. And then you said today, when we talk about defensiveness, this is the flip side. So how is it linked? How are these two things of blame and criticism linked to defensiveness?
So Jamie, and I think that's quite, I think it's really good to just picture it as defensiveness and criticism and blame come together, right?
Okay.
It's two sides of the same coin. So they are really related. So in that interaction, one person is doing the blaming and the criticizing, and one is in a defensive space. So that's the two sides of the coin. So you're always going to have the two, right? If the conflict is, or the negative conflict, because we spoke about healthy conflict yesterday too, but there's always going to be these two players, victim, persecutor, player, all the time, between criticism and defensiveness. So the interesting thing about it being defensiveness, especially people that feel a lot of criticism, that it's very noble, right? I'm just being I'm defensive, right? I'm protecting myself. So, and it's a completely natural response if you're suffering a personal attack. It's an understandable response. But it's a very interesting thing, because we feel quite noble when we're doing it, like I'm just defending myself. But it's actually the flip side of blame, because what you're saying in that interaction, no, it's not me, it's actually you.
Without saying it. You're saying it without saying it, because you're not acknowledging
exactly the same.
The unskillful complaint. Yeah, okay.
You're putting it straight back on the other person. I'm just defending myself. Yeah.
And then that completely shuts down communication, because neither side has understood the requests of the other.
Exactly. And so the whole thing about that defensiveness space that you get into is, you're basically just contributing to the problem, and it escalates the conflict, because there is just lack of clarity on both sides, and it's just going backwards and forwards like that. So, for those of you who are, and I think a lot of women tend to see themselves as more defensive, as opposed to, we actually don't like to admit that we might be doing the criticism.
Yeah, I think we do too, though. Yeah.
But we're far more subtle, right? Because, but it's not me, it's you. So I think it's really important. So if we start with, if you're doing it and you notice that you're being defensive, the first thing you're going to notice is the exact same thing that if you're experiencing criticism, right? You're going to feel that pinch. And that's your flag that something is going on. Something in the dynamic between the two of you, but also something in yourself. You know, you're being triggered by what's going on. So manage that, hold on to that. So notice that, and then see what is your next, you know, your next move in that split second is you're not above the conflict. By being defensive, you're contributing to this unhealthy conflict.
Which
So
is
that,
different than being noble and saying, trying to stay
yeah,
out, but interesting. So
yeah,
good thing
it's
to
kind of like
distinguish.
passive aggressive, I guess. If you, I'm not a psychologist, so I don't really know the full thing
Right.
of passive aggressiveness, but it kind of looks like that. So what you
Mm-hmm.
really want to do is admit to yourself, if you're feeling defensive, that I'm not above this conflict situation. I'm actually contributing to it just by me feeling like this person's criticizing me and she's to blame and it's got nothing to do with me. So first of all, take a piece of responsibility for it in yourself, just for your whole experience. And then we go back to the same thing with criticism, right? Is ask for clarity. So what do you mean when you say this? Because remember, when you're receiving the criticism, you're getting the you know, the unskillful comment or the
Mm-hmm.
unskillful request, and then the negative things about you personally.
Mm-hmm.
So the trick is to manage yourself internally with that personal stuff, because that's going to bite. So
Right.
you're going to breathe into that. You're going to be rubbing your ears. And then you're going to look at the unskillful piece and start asking questions for clarity again.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then the other thing that's a little bit harder for us all to accept is, can we be big enough to look for the 2% truth in what the other person is saying? Can
Why
we
do you say
own?
2%? Yeah.
Because there is a piece, the reason the conflict is there is a dynamic between the two of you. So there's some truth in what the other person is saying.
Mm-hmm.
They're saying, remember, they're trying to give you feedback. They're trying to comment about something that they care about deeply. They're just doing it unskillfully. So you want to hear what it is that they're trying to say about what you did or
Gotcha.
what's going on. And the reason we say 2%, okay, is because that's just enough to crack open our little brain to say, maybe there is something I'm doing here. What can I do?
And
So it's
because
not a
it's
50%, it's just a 2%. You know?
got
Yeah.
you. And because it's an unskillful request, you're probably getting more information than what the 98% of it may be fluff, maybe be distraction or things that are not really focused specifically on what the other person really wants to resolve. Because, like you said, they're not skilled yet at expressing it in a way that would be um, clear or to the point or easy to understand, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think it's extremely hard in any of this unhealthy, toxic conflict for us to own any part of it, right? We have to be bigger than our little selves, right? We have to step into saying, you know, intentionally, I do actually want a better dynamic between this person and me.
Yeah. Yeah,
You
very
know,
good.
and so that is always going to be, I mean, we're in a relationship, right? So we're in it together. It's never just one person's fault.
Right. Always takes two to tango. Um,
Yeah, not even necessarily, you know, two to tango almost implies 50-50, right? Because two are in the dance together. But in this blame and the defensiveness dynamic, look for the 2%. And that is enough for you to own enough so that you can hear the other person. And if the other person starts to hear that they're being heard, not just having blame thrown back at them,
right.
then the whole thing softens. And what you're looking for is that slight softening.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's good. Good. I want to say here to the people that are joining us live, if you have any questions, feedback about what we're talking about, throw those things in the comment. We're super happy to address them. And if you're watching a replay, leave a comment as well, and we'll go back through those later and respond in writing. But I'm curious, Julia, are there types of, we all have our personalities, extroverted, introverted, highly sensitive, empathic or not, or more alpha kind of person. what kind of people tend to be or feel this defensiveness or fall into the defensiveness kind of toxic reaction maybe more than others? Is there a certain set of characteristics that make us more likely to fall kind of into that pattern?
I think it's got to do again with what we spoke about yesterday around power and powerlessness. So you can often see this type of behavior in the workplace where there's roles and power. And so someone considers, they see themselves as smaller or less than. Mm. We're not talking about physical violence here, right? Or domestic violence.
Not at all.
Right.
Not at all.
Right. This is dynamics between people and the grrr that happens between us that's unhealthy, and that we want to shift into healthy situation. But you find that criticism and defensiveness dynamic is always to do with I'm feeling powerlessness or powerless, and I think the other person has power. So that is what we always look for in coaching, is to bring us back into our inner power and to take it back, because when we're in defensive mode, it's out there in the hands of someone else.
Interesting.
And so we need to understand, what is it about you or me that has created that particular wiring or neurological pattern that we feel powerless in this kind of situation. So I can give you two really interesting examples, and if people want to put examples in the comments, it's very interesting here. I coach academics, right? And one of the almost the common themes are, one of the big themes I see a lot. So let's say like a Black woman she's high academic, right? She's top of her field, and she's interacting with white men. And because of South Africa's history, there is a perceived powerlessness, but it's also a particular dynamic around white academic men, the way they're scientific, right? And the way they argue at a point. And they're very robust in their conversations. But women often take it as criticism. Very fascinating, right? And then we've got this extra layer in South Africa of our history. So there's that extra layer of the perceived powerlessness. So a lot of coaching that I'm doing is allowing these women to just step into their own power, because the guy that she's sitting opposite is not intentionally using power against her on purpose. This is a robust conversation, as for example, or they are debating a scientific point. And what happens to these amazing, powerful women is they go, or even in the boardroom, right? They just go quiet. They don't say anything. So that is about power and dynamic, and just really finding your inner power, because then it doesn't matter what's going on around you. Even if it's just, like I say, scientific debate, which is healthy conflict versus unhealthy conflict.
Sure.
But we're talking about the unhealthy conflict, and how do we own what's going on there and become powerful in that. So, and to use an example of where does it come from and how does it show up. Here's a great example from my own life, if people don't mind me using it, is, in my family background, we had quite a lot of, conflict, all right? And I don't even know if it was unhealthy conflict. I was quite young, but nothing was really ever resolved and was always put under the carpet. And so I developed this particularly strange pattern of really didn't like criticism. So my pattern is criticism and defensiveness. So then I marry someone, right, who's a scientist, and he's Scottish, and he loves robust debate and comments, and he's very, he's got a lot to say about the world, right? And so when we're having a conversation, he's excited and he's talking on, and he's like raises his voice and he gets excited, and boom, I get triggered, right? Because I think there's criticism there. So in the beginning, I would be like, this, I felt as triggered as a little girl, right? So powerless, small, wanting to burst into tears. And like, then I would react, right, with whatever reaction, or like, you're just blaming me for this, and no, and it's like, I haven't done anything wrong. And he would go, what are you talking about? This is nothing about you. This is about the telephone system or the fish pond. It's got nothing to do with you at all. And I was just taking it all personally, because that is my wiring. And so the minute I kind of realized, oh boy, here's this old patterning that was laid down from a family dynamic, and it's showing up again and again. Like I said, the same people show up again to teach us things. The same pattern keeps coming up.
Yeah.
And the minute you see it, that's the magic, right? Because then you can interrupt it. Even though you might still get triggered, because that's your fight or flight response coming in. But you can catch it before it's flared straight out, and literally I'm having a tantrum and throwing my toys, you know.
Yeah. I have a question for you about this, because I think that my own patterning is also somewhere between criticism and defensiveness. And one thing I personally, when I look back in the past, one thing I personally see myself doing is wanting to explain the context. So you get a criticism, maybe even I somehow skillfully acknowledge the criticism and look for the root. And if I've done that, I still want to explain, okay, but this is the context in which this thing that you're criticizing me for happened, so that it's almost like a humanizing a bit. I want some empathy so they can see that there was not a bad intent, or that it was not a failure of whatever the judgment I want to avoid may be. Where does that fall? And normally I ask you questions that I think I have an idea about the answer to make sure I don't make myself look bad. This one I don't. I'm just genuinely curious. Where does that fall?
Yeah, you know, there's something about a coach telling stories about her life that people go, and she's going to coach me? Like, really?
Well, I'm not coaching, so I can say my things. You're the coach.
And me as well, right? Like,
no, but
yeah,
it's
all
good,
the deep, dark secrets, yeah.
Yeah, but also I think it's good for people to know. I mean, as much as you know, as far along as you may be in your personal development journey, there's always something to learn. There's always something to grow. And something can happen and we fall back into a pattern that we have been over for 10, 20 years, and suddenly we find ourselves in it because something snapped us back to it. Maybe it wasn't fully healed. So I asked that question because I wonder, is that still defensiveness? Is that an inappropriate thing to do, is to give context after you've acknowledged the other person? Is that also kind of not really helpful?
Yeah, I would actually be asking yourself why, you know, what is beneath your need to justify?
To not,
you know, are you thinking they're actually hearing you? You know, and are you being clear?
Yeah. Okay.
There's something there that's kind of they're misunderstanding it, so they're judging me, and I would possibly be working with you. Well, what does it matter, Jamie?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And working on that inner solid core of actually, you know, if you're sovereign and you fully own your emotional experience, that, you know, they just need to know the facts, and they get to think whatever they're going to think about you, and it actually doesn't need to bother you. So that all that justifying and all that thing is partly a powerlessness of you wanting other people to feel, or kind of to like you, so that you feel good about yourself. There, I'm just putting it out there, right? I don't know, because we have
probably,
could be.
Probably very true. Yeah.
And I would just watch yourself in that need to justify. To sort of ask them what, you know, it's about asking them what is their complaint actually about, and then what's the 2% truth, and then acknowledging that 2% truth, even if you can only acknowledge yourself in the beginning. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. That is helpful. Well, tell us some other ways that defensiveness shows up. Are there ways that it shows up secretly that we might not be naming as defensiveness, and it is defensiveness? How can we keep an eye out for it?
Sorry, say that again. How can we
keep an eye out for defensiveness in the various ways that it shows up, either through our own behavior or in others?
Mm. Well, I think you're going to notice it if it, I mean, the word to use is if it pinches you or sucker punches you. Because if it's showing up somewhere else and you're not reacting to it, then it's not toxic conflict, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
only toxic conflict when you're having, when you're getting triggered and you're letting yourself get into reactive mode. So you will know when something is, you know, your body will tell you when something has had an impact on you. So, you know, I do want to warn, and before we finish, I want to talk about, you know, if you're someone that actually does this too, if you're someone, if what to do if you're experiencing someone in a defensive mode, because that's also useful, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what I really want to caution about is, let's also be careful when we're having a conversation with someone of name calling, right? Of immediately saying that's criticism and blame, or that's defensiveness. Be careful of that, because the more we box people and we box behaviors and we sort of try and define them and make others wrong, we tighten everything, okay? And we kind of solidify the problem instead of like a, you know, that curiosity of like, I want to open this up, I want to let a bit of light in, a little bit of love, a little bit of something to just ease this up. So be mindful of your own inbuilt filtering system. Like my example from my own life with my husband, right? There's no criticism there. It was my wiring, my built-in filtering system, you know, that part of my brain that's filtering all the stuff coming in, was filtering that as a threat. And so that's what you've got to work with, is how are you, what are you letting in, and what are you naming it as? To be careful, you know, to not every person that criticizes you is doing toxic criticism.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not every time you experience someone being defensive is it toxic, right? It's only toxic when it escalates. So, you know, to all the people out there and who are experiencing defensive people,